Have you ever witnessed a single moment that strips away polished facades and lays bare the heart of human decency or the lack of it? Imagine a bustling airplane cabin high above the clouds where ordinary travelers meet extraordinary fates. In seat 12C sits a serene black woman with a gentle smile and a quiet confidence. Across the aisle stands a flight attendant who scowls at her every word, mocking her accent in hushed but not unnoticed tones. Little does the flight attendant know this passenger is no ordinary traveler. Today the tension will climb to turbulent heights, and by landing the power dynamic in this sky-bound drama, will flip forever. Naomi Carter peered out the window of the taxi as it pulled up to Newark Liberty International Airport. The late afternoon sun glinted off the terminal's glass facade, reminding her of the brilliant city lights she'd left behind in Lagos just days ago. At 32, she was used to traveling around the world for business, though few ever suspected who she really was. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer that offset her dark skin and braided hair, which she styled in a crown-like updo. For years she had cultivated the art of blending into a crowd. Her accent, laced with the rich undertones of West Africa, inevitably drew attention whenever she spoke. She loved her accent. It was part of her heritage. But she had learned that some people would use it as an excuse to diminish her. On this day, Naomi felt a conflicting sense of excitement and apprehension. She'd just spent a productive week in New York negotiating a philanthropic partnership on behalf of Carter Global Holdings, her late father's multi-industry conglomerate. She was heading to Los Angeles to finalize an agreement for a new scholarship program aimed at assisting underprivileged students from across the African continent. This flight was supposed to be routine, a quick, quiet trip. But fate had orchestrated a different plan. As the taxi driver handed Naomi her luggage, she offered a warm, genuine smile. She always made a point to tip generously. "God bless you," she said softly, her accent rolling gently off her tongue. The driver thanked her and waved goodbye. Naomi adjusted the strap of her leather carry-on bag, ignoring the pinching ache in her shoulders. She was tired, but her spirit felt alight with purpose. Stepping through the automatic doors, she inhaled the familiar swirl of coffee cleaning solution and the underlying scent of airline fuel that seemed to cling to every airport. Overhead monitors indicated she was on time for her flight with Skyward Jet, a rapidly growing airline that offered cross-country service. Little did most of the public know that Carter Global Holdings had quietly acquired a significant stake in Skyward Jet 5 years ago. Naomi herself had orchestrated that deal. She might not own the entire airline outright, but her influence was pivotal. She sat on the board and held a controlling majority of shares. For today's journey, though, she intended to remain just another passenger seated in economy class for a short flight. She quietly believed that to truly understand the airline's strengths and weaknesses, one needed to experience it from a regular traveler's perspective. She had no interest in first-class pampering. She wanted to see, hear, and feel how Skyward Jet treated its everyday passengers. As Naomi approached the check-in kiosk, she noticed a tall woman with carefully styled blonde hair standing at the counter. The woman wore the crisp navy blue uniform of a Skyward Jet flight attendant. A single gold pin on her lapel identified her as Regina Parker. Regina appeared to be in her late 30s, with a haughty tilt to her chin that suggested a sense of superiority. She was talking with another passenger, her voice saccharine sweet. However, the moment the passenger turned away, Regina's expression shifted, revealing the coldness behind her practiced smile. Naomi quietly completed her self-check-in. She already had an electronic boarding pass on her phone, so she didn't technically need help. But the machine spat out an error. A passing gate agent tried to assist, but the kiosk displayed the same glitch. Regina, overhearing the exchange, stepped over. "Let me see that," she said, punctuating her sentence with a sigh of exasperation. She reached for Naomi's passport. "Oh, you're from Nigeria," she said, squinting at the cover. Naomi nodded politely. "Yes, I am. There seems to be an error with my booking." Regina's gaze flicked over Naomi's face, then her hair, then her outfit, as though summing up her entire worth. "Did you buy the ticket online or through some special channel?" Her tone faltered, suggesting she had a preconceived notion about how someone like Naomi might have obtained her seat. Naomi kept her voice calm. "Through Skyward Jet's official website. Here's the confirmation email if you need it." Without responding, Regina tapped a few buttons on the kiosk. Suddenly, the machine coughed out a boarding pass. Regina printed it, then held it out, barely looking Naomi in the eye. "Here you go. Next time, make sure you book everything properly." Naomi noticed the undertone that implied she was somehow incompetent, or that her accent meant she couldn't navigate an online system. But she said nothing, only offering a measured nod. She took the boarding pass, glancing at it to confirm her seat number 12C. "Thank you," she replied. Regina's dismissive shrug was the only acknowledgement she received in return. Naomi stepped away, her gut twisting. She reminded herself that prejudice often came in small gestures and subtle remarks. Not every insult was explicit. Sometimes it was a frigid glance or a condescending tone. She had faced this before, and no doubt she would face it again. Yet something about Regina's expression stayed with her. There was malice in her eyes that hinted this wasn't the last time they would cross paths that day. After grabbing a quick cappuccino from a Starbucks, a small, real-world detail that always anchored Naomi in the routine, she made her way to the departure gate. The area was bustling with energy couples on romantic getaways, business travelers tapping at laptops, and families wrangling excited children. When the boarding call for Group 2 sounded over the speakers, Naomi joined the line. Moments later, the gate agent scanned her pass, and she stepped down the jet bridge, inhaling the stale mixture of air conditioning and anticipation. She was just behind an older man, wearing a rumpled suit, who was grumbling about the lack of overhead bin space. Ahead of them, a petite mother tried to calm her crying toddler. Naomi caught a glimpse of the plane's tail outside the window. Skyward Jet's distinctive logo, a stylized bird soaring upward. It was a brand she had helped design, spending long hours with marketing teams and graphic artists to capture the concept of limitless possibility. Yet the people inside this aircraft, the flight attendants, the pilots, rarely knew her role. She liked it that way. People's true colors always emerged when they thought you were nobody. Stepping into the cabin, Naomi was enveloped by the usual hustle. Passengers jostled to stow their luggage, flight attendants directed traffic. A younger stewardess with a bright smile greeted Naomi. "Welcome aboard, ma'am." Naomi nodded, grateful for the kindness. She was nearly at row 12 when she heard an unmistakable voice from behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am," Regina said, stepping into the aisle. "Are you in the right row?" Naomi turned around, holding her boarding pass. "Yes, seat 12C." She gestured to the overhead marker. "This is row 12. For a moment, Regina's gaze flicked to Naomi's carry-on bag, then to Naomi's shoes, as if searching for something to criticize. "All right, just make sure to place your bag properly so we can close the overhead bins." Her voice was laced with disapproval. Naomi maneuvered her bag into the bin, With ease, she had done this countless times, and took her seat. She could feel Regina's stare a prickle against her back. The plane was filling up quickly, and soon the aisle was packed with restless passengers. Naomi focused on sipping her Starbucks cappuccino, hoping to steady any nerves. Behind her, she could hear Regina speaking too loudly to a colleague, complaining about how some foreign passengers don't know how to board planes efficiently. The words were meant to be overheard. Naomi clenched her jaw, but remained silent. All she wanted was a peaceful flight to LA. If Regina insisted on continuing her microaggressions, Naomi would handle it quietly later. She refused to let this flight attendant ruin her day. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone on board. The usual safety announcements followed, with Regina demonstratively pointing out the exit seatbelt operation and the oxygen masks. Naomi watched her with cautious interest. On the surface, Regina was an impeccable, professional straight posture, clear instructions, forced smile. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something simmered beneath the veneer, threatening to bubble over. Just as the plane began to taxi, the overhead lights flickered. Regina marched down the aisle, instructing passengers to turn off their electronic devices. She stopped at Naomi's row. Naomi had already switched her phone to airplane mode, but she double-checked out of courtesy. Regina scowled. "Are you sure your device is off? I can still see a light." Naomi held up her phone, showing the black screen. "It's in airplane mode and the screen is locked." Regina sniffed dismissively. "I'll be watching." Across the aisle, a young teenage boy listened to music through wireless earbuds. Regina pointed at him too. "Headphones off, sweetie." Her tone was dripping with condescension. The boy sheepishly obeyed. Naomi noticed a pattern. Regina seemed particularly brusque with passengers she perceived as less privileged or who looked different. As the plane took off, the roar of the engines filled the cabin. Naomi felt the familiar lift of gravity letting go. She always found the moment of takeoff exhilarating, like a metaphor for reaching new heights in life. But the seatbelt sign remained illuminated longer than usual. About 15 minutes into the flight, the aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence. Drinks rattled on tray tables. The overhead compartments quivered. A flight attendant's voice rang out, reminding everyone to keep their seatbelts fastened. Regina stalked through the cabin, her face tense. She barked instructions to passengers who tried to stand. "Sit down. We're not stable yet." She lingered near Naomi's row, glancing over as if expecting Naomi to do something wrong. Naomi kept her seatbelt firmly on, hands folded in her lap, maintaining an air of calm. She reminded herself that Regina's ire was not her responsibility. A sudden jolt rocked the plane, prompting startled gasps. Naomi's heart pounded, but the turbulence quickly passed. Moments later, the flight smoothed out, and the seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers collectively exhaled. That's when Regina announced it was safe to move around. She began the in-flight service, passing out soft drinks and snack packs. Naomi requested ginger ale, her usual remedy for a mildly upset stomach after turbulence. Regina handed it over with a curt nod. Naomi offered a polite thank you, but Regina seemed uninterested in any civil exchange. Naomi opened her tray table, took a sip of her drink, and tried to relax. She had no intention of provoking any drama, but destiny, it seemed, had other plans. An hour into the flight, Naomi found herself drawn into a conversation with the man seated beside her, an elderly gentleman named Richard Barnes. He looked like he might be in his 70s, with kind eyes and a handshake that had lost none of its firmness. As they chatted about destinations and life experiences, Naomi felt some of her tension ease. I used to be in the airline industry, Richard admitted. Pilot for over 30 years, mostly with American Airlines. Naomi arched her brow, genuinely impressed. That's wonderful. I'm sure you've seen it all. Richard chuckled. More than I can fit into a single conversation. You remind me of someone I met decades ago, a board member from some big firm. You have that same calm confidence. Naomi smiled, thinking how ironic it was that her seatmate once worked in aviation. She wondered if he sensed her deeper connection to Skyward Jet. She didn't want to bring it up yet, so she steered the conversation elsewhere. The flight attendant's beverage cart reached them. This time it was manned by another attendant, a cheerful woman named Helena. She served them extra napkins, refilled Naomi's ginger ale, and asked if they needed anything else. The difference in warmth between Helena's demeanor and Regina's was stark. Naomi glanced over her shoulder, spotting Regina stationed at the back of the plane. She was speaking with a colleague in hushed, annoyed tones. The colleague occasionally glanced around nervously, as if fearing passengers might overhear. Regina's gestures were animated. She pointed toward Naomi's row more than once. Naomi couldn't hear all the words, but phrases like, acting all high and mighty, and these foreigners who don't even speak English right, drifted across the cabin. There it was again, direct mockery. Naomi pressed her lips together. She felt that familiar urge to stand up for herself, to call out bigotry in its tracks. Yet she'd learned over time that sometimes confrontation could be more effective when meticulously planned, especially in a professional environment. If Regina was this brazen in public, how had she not been disciplined? Perhaps no one had ever caught her in an undeniably offensive act. But Naomi now had first-hand experience, and she had some measure of power beyond Regina's understanding. Richard noticed Naomi's somber expression. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded slowly. "I'm fine, just noticing some attitudes around here." He sighed. "Yes, unfortunately, some people are slow to progress. But keep being you. That's what matters." Naomi smiled her thanks, but inside she was already strategizing. She always believed in leading with compassion, but that did not mean allowing oneself to be trampled on. Perhaps the first step was to gather more information to see how Regina treated not just her, but every passenger. If the pattern continued, Naomi would address it upon landing, not just as a passenger filing a complaint, but as someone with the authority to make real change. Time inched forward as the plane traversed the country. Naomi flipped through a magazine, occasionally looking out the window at the patchwork of terrain below. The seatbelt sign came on again when the plane encountered another round of mild turbulence. Regina was back in the aisle, eyeing Naomi with that same suspicious glare. In an attempt to get comfortable, Naomi decided to gently recline her seat by a small fraction. The passenger behind her was a mother holding a sleeping toddler. She had nodded politely when Naomi made eye contact, indicating it was okay to recline a bit. Naomi was careful not to intrude on the mother's space. However, within moments, Regina materialized at Naomi's elbow. "Ma'am? The seatbelt sign is on." "The seat must remain upright," Regina snapped. Naomi glanced at her seat's recline. It was barely an inch. "I believe minimal recline is still allowed, but if it's an issue, I can sit straight." She slowly moved her seat upright, maintaining an even tone. As Regina turned away, Naomi heard her mutter under her breath. "Honestly, learn the rules if you're going to fly." Naomi felt the sting, but held her tongue. She heard a few passengers nearby shift uncomfortably, likely noticing the tension. Eventually the turbulence subsided, and the sign turned off again. Regina disappeared behind the curtain separating the galley from the passenger cabin. Naomi took the opportunity to chat more with Richard, who told her stories of flying jumbo jets across the Atlantic. He had a wealth of knowledge about navigation airlines and the intricacies of aviation law. They shared a laugh about the time he flew a plane that had to make an emergency stop in Canada because a moose was wandering near the runway. When the conversation lulled, Naomi stretched her legs, feeling the onset of weariness. The flight was only 6 hours, but she was drained from a week of meetings. She closed her eyes, hoping to catch a brief nap. That's when she heard the raised voices from the row behind her. A young black man, probably in his early 20s, was talking to Regina. From the snippet Naomi caught, it seemed the man had requested a vegetarian meal due to dietary restrictions, but Regina was insisting they had no more vegetarian trays left. "You should have made that request earlier," Regina barked, ignoring the passenger's explanation that he did so at booking. "If you can't handle the standard meal, maybe you should carry your own food." The man's face flushed. "I did request it earlier, ma'am. It's in my reservation." Naomi watched as Regina rolled her eyes. Her voice dropped to a scornful whisper, but loud enough for those around to hear. It's always something with these special requests, especially from certain people. Next time, fly an airline that cares. Naomi felt her stomach churn. She could sense the shame the young man felt. Others around him looked on with sympathy, but no one spoke up. Naomi glanced at Richard, who seemed equally disturbed. She debated intervening, but Regina stomped off to the galley before Naomi could say a word. Naomi carefully unbuckled her seatbelt and rose. She could no longer sit idle while Regina disrespected another passenger. She made her way toward the back of the plane, where Regina stood rummaging through a compartment. "Excuse me," Naomi said gently, stepping aside to let another flight attendant pass. Regina swiveled her head, eyebrow raised. "Yes," Naomi mustered her calmest voice. "I wanted to ask about the vegetarian meal for the gentleman in 13B. He says he requested it in advance." Regina folded her arms. "And what's it to you?" Naomi inhaled slowly. "I'm concerned because he specifically mentioned having it noted in his booking. If it was a system error, maybe there's an alternative meal left." Regina let out a sharp laugh. "We don't have infinite resources, especially for last-minute demands. Besides, I checked, there's no special request in the system." Naomi tilted her head, maintaining composure. She knew all about how Skyward Jet's meal request system worked and that the record could be verified. "Is there any way to double-check?" He seemed quite certain. Regina's face hardened. "Look here, I know my job. I've done this for years. If that passenger can't see the seat number or type in the forms correctly, that's his problem. Now, if you'd kindly return to your seat, we have a flight to attend to." Naomi recognized the condescension, the coded assumption that the young black passenger didn't know what he was doing. She forced a polite smile. "I understand. Thank you for your time." With that, she turned to walk away, but Regina's voice cut through the air. "You people are always so pushy," Regina sneered, not bothering to lower her volume. Naomi paused, her heart pounding. She turned around, slowly. "What did you say?" Regina lifted her chin defiantly. "You heard me. I have a job to do, and I don't appreciate foreign passengers telling me how to do it." The flight attendant nearest them looked aghast, exchanging a concerned glance with Naomi. This was no longer a subtle microaggression. It was blatant hostility. Naomi stared at Regina, speechless for a moment. The entire cabin seemed to hum with tension. She noticed a few passengers leaning into the aisle, trying to make sense of the commotion. "I will return to my seat," Naomi said, her voice unwavering. "But know this. I don't need to be foreign or anything else to recognize unprofessional behavior when I see it." Regina scoffed. "Right, run along then." Biting back a retort, Naomi marched toward her seat. The sense of injustice boiled in her veins. She thought of all the times her father had told her, "You are strong, Naomi. Never let hatred diminish your dignity." She repeated those words in her mind like a mantra, promising herself that Regina's misconduct would not go unanswered. When Naomi settled back into seat 12C, Richard leaned toward her. "I caught the tail end of that. Are you all right?" She nodded, releasing a shaky breath. "I'll be fine. Thank you. But this is unacceptable." Richard pursed his lips. "I've flown with some challenging crew members, but this is beyond the pale. The way she's speaking to passengers, especially you, is downright discriminatory." Naomi glanced down at her phone, remembering that she had access to certain executive channels. However, in-flight coverage was spotty at best. She debated whether to send a discreet message to the head office, but she wanted to see if Regina's behavior escalated any further before making a definitive report. Some of the other passengers looked sympathetic, exchanging concerned glances with Naomi. One or two gave her an encouraging nod, as if silently cheering her on. She spotted Helena, the friendly flight attendant, peering anxiously from the front galley, but she seemed uncertain whether to intervene. The reality of chain of command in airlines was complicated. Flight attendants typically had to support each other, even if one was blatantly in the wrong, unless a passenger's safety was compromised. Nevertheless, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. Whispers circulated about Regina's hostility, the overshadowed tension. A mother 2 rows ahead discreetly told Naomi, "I'm sorry, you're dealing with that." Another passenger quietly advised, "You should report her," though no one was stepping up to publicly challenge Regina yet. Naomi appreciated their solidarity, but she knew that changing a system required more than just a single passenger complaint. It required documentation, accountability, and the right lever of influence. She had all 3 if she chose to use them. As the plane soared westward, crossing over plains and mountains, Naomi gazed out the window, recalling the times she had faced prejudice in her life, in elite classrooms at corporate negotiations, and even in philanthropic circles. Each incident stung, but her father's legacy had instilled in her a deep resolve to stand up not just for herself, but for those who might not be able to. Her father, the legendary David Carter, had built Carter Global Holdings from a modest trade company in Lagos to a global powerhouse. Though he had passed away when Naomi was 25, his principles guided her every move. She had taken the family business even further, forging alliances worldwide. The acquisition of a controlling stake in Skyward Jet had been a strategic move, bridging Africa, Europe, and North America with accessible routes. It was meant to be a beacon of inclusive travel. Now, ironically, an attendant in her own partially owned airline was deriding her accent and her heritage. Naomi felt the slow rising tide of righteous anger, but she would remain patient and measured. By the time the wheels touched down in Los Angeles, she intended to ensure that Regina would either learn a life-altering lesson or find herself in a predicament that she could not simply shrug off. As the flight neared the halfway point, the cabin lights dimmed, signaling rest time for passengers. Naomi dozed lightly, head resting against the window. In her half-conscious state, she could still hear snippets of conversation around her. At one point, she vaguely heard Regina's voice from behind the curtain at the galley. "I swear, if one more passenger from who knows where tries to question me, It's ridiculous. We get all sorts of weird accents these days. I can't even understand half of them." A lower voice responded, possibly one of her colleagues. Naomi couldn't catch the reply, but Regina's angry sigh was audible. Naomi opened her eyes just in time to see Regina storm past. She decided to check on the young man who had requested the vegetarian meal. He was still awake, scrolling listlessly through the seatback entertainment. Naomi walked over and tapped his shoulder lightly. "Excuse me," she said with a warm smile. "I noticed you didn't get your meal. I have some snacks with me, protein bars. Fruit, would you like some?" He looked surprised, then grateful. "That's really kind of you. Thank you." Naomi handed him a couple of protein bars from her carry-on. "I'm sorry about what happened. It seems they've run out of vegetarian options, but hopefully this will tide you over." He shook his head, frustration evident. "I travel with Skyward Jet often. I always book vegetarian. Never had a problem before. Now I'm starving." Naomi patted his shoulder reassuringly. "I understand. I'll do what I can to address this." She headed back to her seat, noticing that Helena, the pleasant attendant, caught her eye. Helena appeared troubled, as though she wanted to say something, but was unsure if she should. Eventually, Helena approached Naomi. Ma'am Helena began hesitantly. "I just want you to know that we do have some extra snack boxes. They're not full meals, but we can give him something better than a protein bar if you like." Naomi nodded. "That would be wonderful. Thank you so much." Helena smiled, relief washing over her face. She looked around to make sure Regina wasn't lurking. "I'm sorry about Regina," she whispered. She's had complaints before. But she's a senior attendant, so..." Helena trailed off, shrugging helplessly. Naomi offered a small smile. "Thank you for doing the right thing." Helena tiptoed away, returning shortly with a snack box brimming with crackers, cheese, fruit cups, and a small sandwich that was labeled vegetarian. Naomi thanked her again and personally delivered it to the passenger in 13B, who looked at her with immense gratitude. Upon returning to her seat, Naomi felt a surge of purpose. She now had confirmation that Regina's behavior wasn't isolated. There were prior complaints. The airline's management had clearly not addressed them effectively. If a senior attendant could continue to act this way without reprimand, it implied a deeper problem. And Naomi had the power to fix it, or at least begin the process. Quietly, she pulled out her tablet. She always traveled with it, as it had an offline function for note-taking. She started drafting an email for the executive board at Carter Global Holdings, planning to send it the moment she had a secure connection upon landing. She documented the date, flight number, and details of Regina's misconduct, including potential violations of company policy and passenger rights. This time, the complaint wouldn't just be tossed aside. Naomi would see to that. Mid-flight, Naomi felt her tablet buzz with an unexpected notification. She realized she was connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, which was patchy but functional. A message from her assistant, Clara, popped up in her email inbox. Subject: urgent call from Skyward Jet's CEO. Body. Hello, Ms. Carter. The CEO of Skyward Jet, Gordon Fraser, wants to speak with you at your earliest convenience. He mentioned it's about a potential policy change you suggested last month. Please let me know once you land so we can schedule a call immediately. Naomi blinked in surprise. Gordon Fraser rarely called her directly, though they shared the boardroom on critical issues. She typed a quick reply, instructing Clara to set up the call for after she landed. She'd have more than a few things to discuss with him by then. She closed the email, her mind drifting to the last meeting she'd had with Gordon. She had proposed a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all Skyward Jet employees, specifically focusing on eliminating racial bias and improving cultural sensitivity. Some of the board members viewed it as unnecessary, believing Skyward Jet's existing training was sufficient. Naomi had fought back gently, citing traveler complaints and her own experiences in the industry. Yet the initiative remained in limbo. Naomi's conversation with Gordon later that day would carry new weight. Now she had a real-time example of why such training was critical. She even wondered if she should mention that she was currently experiencing discriminatory behavior on a Skyward Jet flight. Perhaps it was best to handle it strategically. First gather all the facts, then present them in a powerful, undeniable manner. Naomi felt the plane jolt slightly. A flight attendant's voice this time, Helena's, announced the plane was beginning its gradual descent into Los Angeles. Already, the flight had felt both interminable and strangely quick thanks to all the tension. She double-checked her seatbelt. The end of the flight was near, and she wondered if Regina had any final acts of unprofessionalism up her sleeve. Sure enough, as the plane descended, Regina made one last pass down the aisle. She instructed passengers to return tray tables to their upright positions and dispose of any trash. When she reached Naomi's row, she paused, arms folded. Any trash, she asked curtly, barely extending the waste bag. Naomi shook her head, having placed her rubbish in a disposal bag earlier. She expected Regina to move on, but the flight attendant lingered. "You seem awfully comfortable," Regina said, her lip curling. "Don't forget to power off your devices completely. Some people think airplane mode is good enough, but it's not." Naomi's tone remained composed. "Airplane mode is an acceptable industry standard." Regina rolled her eyes. "For some devices, maybe. But rules can vary. People with thick accents might not understand that." The words felt like a slap. A hush fell over the surrounding rows. Several passengers glared at Regina in disbelief. Richard looked outraged, about to intervene, but Naomi gently placed a hand on his arm, signaling she would handle this. Naomi locked her tablet and calmly placed it in her bag. She gave Regina a measured look, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "I understand the rules well," Naomi said, letting her accent flow proudly. "In fact, I've been helping to shape them for this airline for years." Regina released a high-pitched, dismissive laugh, apparently clueless to Naomi's true identity. "Right. Sure you have." She waved a hand. "Just know that if you refuse to follow our instructions, we have the right to remove you or refuse service in the future." Naomi said nothing more. Instead, she turned back to her seat, looking ahead at the seat in front of her, an expression of calm determination on her face. Richard reached over and squeezed her hand in solidarity. Nearby, passengers murmured their support, shaking their heads at Regina's audacity. The plane sank through the clouds, the blue sky fading into the haze above Los Angeles. Naomi felt her pulse quicken, anticipation blending with anger. Soon they would land. Soon Regina's illusions of impunity would be shattered. Naomi knew it was time to show exactly how serious the situation was, and to do it without stooping to Regina's level of cruelty. The wheels screeched against the runway as the aircraft touched down at Los Angeles International Airport. Overhead, bins rattled, and a wave of relief and restlessness washed through the cabin. The pilot welcomed everyone to LAX, reminding them to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was switched off. The moment the plane slowed to a taxi, Regina unbuckled and stood repeating the standard instructions in a dispassionate tone. She avoided eye contact with Naomi as if her job were nearly done and she'd already moved on from the altercation. Naomi, however, had made a plan. She knew from past experience that upon landing the flight crew usually had a few minutes of quiet as passengers disembarked. That was when she would act. She put away her tablet, took a deep breath, and steeled herself. When the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers rose in a cacophony of seatbelts clinking and overhead compartments opening. People gathered their bags, complaining about cramped aisles and rummaging for lost items. Naomi watched Regina from the corner of her eye. The flight attendant stood near the front exit, wishing passengers a half-hearted good day. Naomi let most of the plane empty first. Richard waited as well, out of courtesy. He whispered to Naomi, "I have a feeling something big is coming." Naomi offered a slight smile. "I'd appreciate if you could walk with me, if you don't mind." "Of course," Richard agreed. When the last group of passengers inched forward, Naomi and Richard joined them in the aisle heading toward Regina. Helena was at the galley, eyeing the scene anxiously. Regina continued to face the opposite direction, rummaging in a compartment near the cockpit door, as if relieved the flight was finally over. Naomi stopped just short of Regina's position, her carry-on in hand. Richard stood behind her arms, crossed protectively. A hush seemed to fall over that front portion of the cabin. Helena looked from Naomi to Regina, a sense of foreboding in her eyes. "Excuse me, Miss Parker," Naomi said, her tone polite. Regina turned slowly, annoyance etched across her features. "If you need something, you'll have to wait until we're done disembarking." Naomi nodded. "I understand. But it won't take long." She reached into her blazer pocket and withdrew a crisp, folded document, something she'd carried with her for years, ever since the finalization of Carter Global Holdings' majority acquisition in Skyward Jet. It was a symbolic deed of controlling shares used in certain corporate ceremonies, though not the legal certificate itself. Still, it bore official stamps and signatures, marking Naomi Carter as the rightful majority shareholder of Skyward Jet. Regina frowned, glancing at the document. "What is that?" Naomi unfolded it carefully, revealing the heading Skyward Jet, Certification of Majority Share Ownership. Regina's eyes flicked over the official markings, confusion morphing into shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but only managed a stutter. Naomi looked her squarely in the eye. "I told you, Miss Parker, I helped shape the rules of this airline. You see, I am Naomi Carter. My family's company, Carter Global Holdings, holds the controlling stake in Skyward Jet. That makes me effectively your employer's employer." Regina's face drained of color. The documents were unmistakably real, bearing the airline's logo, the notarized stamps, and the signature of Gordon Fraser, the CEO. She clutched the back of a seat for support, her mouth ajar. I didn't know," Regina murmured, cheeks burning with humiliation. Naomi held up a hand for silence. "Your ignorance is exactly the point. Throughout this flight, I've observed you belittle passengers, mock their accents, and discriminate against those who don't fit your narrow worldview. You've embarrassed this airline and undermined everything it stands for." Regina swallowed hard, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. Helena stood nearby, wide-eyed, witnessing the unraveling. Richard kept silent, letting Naomi take the lead. I'm sorry," Regina stammered, a tremor in her voice. "I didn't mean." Naomi's gaze was steady. "You did mean it. You made those choices, spoke those words. And unfortunately you did so under the name of Skyward Jet, the airline that I've worked tirelessly to elevate as a symbol of global unity and respect." Regina's breathing grew ragged. "Please, I need this job. I've got a family." Naomi pressed her lips together, the memory of Regina's sneering remarks echoing in her mind. "I'm not here to destroy your life, Miss Parker. However, there must be accountability. Your attitude has no place in a business that welcomes travelers from every corner of the world." Tears pooled in Regina's eyes. She looked around, possibly hoping her colleagues would jump to her defense, but many of them had already left the aircraft with the departing passengers, or were too stunned to intervene. Helena was rooted to her spot, looking more relieved than sympathetic. "I'm truly sorry," Regina breathed desperation, cracking her voice. "I never would have spoken to you like that if I knew who you were." Naomi's jaw set. "That's precisely the problem. You assumed I was nobody, someone you could demean without consequence. That speaks volumes about your character. And let's not forget the other passengers you disrespected today, including the young man with the vegetarian meal request." Regina hung her head, speechless. Naomi inhaled, centering herself. She was not a vindictive person by nature. Still, she felt righteous anger for the countless travelers who must have endured Regina's contempt over the years without the power to challenge her. Now that Naomi could do something, she had to. "Ms. Parker." Naomi continued, voice controlled, but firm. "I'm going to report this incident immediately to CEO Gordon Fraser and the board. Expect disciplinary measures. The final decision isn't solely mine, but as the majority shareholder, my recommendations carry significant weight." Regina nodded stiffly, tears trickling down her cheeks. "I understand," she choked out. I don't know what else to say." Naomi studied her for a long moment. "I hope you learn from this. Perhaps you'll realize that every passenger is worthy of respect, regardless of their accent or background." With that, Naomi folded the document and slipped it back into her blazer pocket. She turned to Richard, who gave her a solemn nod, and together they headed up the jet bridge, leaving Regina trembling by the forward galley. Helena quietly mouthed, "Thank you," as Naomi passed an unspoken acknowledgement that the airline might finally address the toxicity in their ranks. The blast of LAX's bustling terminal struck Naomi the moment she emerged from the aircraft. Throngs of passengers hurried to baggage claim or connecting flights, while digital displays listed arrivals and departures against a backdrop of neon advertisements. Richard gently tapped Naomi's shoulder. "I'm proud of how you handled that, Miss Carter," he said, using a more formal tone now that he understood her status. Naomi offered him a warm smile. "Please just call me Naomi, and thank you for your support. I appreciate you staying by my side." He dipped his head in a gentlemanly bow. "My pleasure. If you ever need any insight from a retired pilot, I'm your man." They walked together toward baggage claim, chatting about the surreal turn of events. Naomi promised to keep in touch, offering Richard her business card. He smiled carefully, tucking it into his wallet. He gave her one final handshake before parting ways, his face radiating pride at having witnessed justice. Naomi exhaled, scanning the terminal. Clara, her assistant, was due to meet her near the escalators. She spotted Clara's familiar figure, a petite woman in a smart pantsuit, waving eagerly. Naomi rushed over, feeling a flood of relief at a friendly face. "Ms. Carter." Clara called her smile, quickly turning to concern as she studied Naomi's expression. "You look tense." Naomi let out a half laugh, half sigh. "That's one way to put it. We have a lot to discuss." Clara nodded, leading Naomi to a quieter corner near the exit doors. "Mr. Frazier is expecting your call in about half an hour. We can debrief in the car if you prefer." Naomi glanced at her watch. Perfect timing. "Yes, let's do that. Also, I need you to set up a meeting with the board immediately. Today's flight uncovered some serious lapses in employee training and customer service." Clara escorted Naomi through the terminal to a waiting black sedan. A driver opened the door, and Naomi slipped into the back seat, mentally rehearsing what she would say to Gordon Frazier. Clara sat beside her, opening a sleek laptop to take notes. As the car pulled away from the curb, Clara quickly jotted down the events Naomi recounted: the flight attendant's contempt, the repeated verbal jabs, and the final confrontation. Naomi handed Clara a copy of the incident details she'd typed on the flight, plus the passenger seat numbers of witnesses. Clara's eyes widened. "This is serious. We've had minor complaints before, but nothing this blatant. Are you sure you want to escalate it directly to the board?" Naomi fixed Clara with a firm gaze. "Absolutely. This isn't just about me. This is about any passenger who's ever been treated like they're beneath basic respect." Clara nodded, typing fervently. "All right. I'll coordinate with the corporate office to get everyone on a video conference as soon as possible." Naomi stared out the car window, the Los Angeles skyline shimmering in the distance. Memories of her father's unwavering stance on ethics and equality floated through her mind. She felt a deep resolve to uphold that legacy now more than ever. Her phone vibrated an incoming call from Gordon Frazier, right on schedule. Naomi pressed the green icon, signaling Clara to hit record on the laptop to document the conversation. Naomi came the booming voice of Gordon Frazier. "I hope your flight was smooth. Wait, let me guess, you flew under the radar again, didn't you?" He chuckled at his own joke, referencing Naomi's habit of blending in as a regular passenger. Naomi's tone was professional. "Hello, Gordon. Actually, I did fly under the radar, which unfortunately brought some concerning issues to light." He paused, the humor vanishing from his voice. "What do you mean?" Naomi wasted no time detailing the misconduct she had witnessed and experienced from Regina. She provided context about the repeated aggressions, including the final blatant remarks. By the end of her account, Gordon sounded flabbergasted. "This is unacceptable. I wasn't aware we had staff engaging in such behavior. I apologize deeply on behalf of the airline." Naomi's voice held a calm but stern edge. "This isn't just about an apology, Gordon. We have to ensure no passenger, regardless of race, accent, or culture, ever experiences this again. I want immediate disciplinary action and a thorough review of our training protocols." Gordon sighed heavily. "I agree. Our internal policies do allow for termination if an employee exhibits discrimination. We also need to address oversight in the chain of command. I take these matters seriously." Naomi pressed forward. "I'm calling for an urgent board meeting to discuss broader changes, mandatory sensitivity training, stricter oversight, and a system that encourages employees to report internal issues without fear of backlash." Gordon cleared his throat. "Understood. I'll send out notices right away. We can convene tomorrow, given everyone's schedule. Are you in town for a while?" "Yes, I'll be in LA for a few days. I expect us to make definitive progress at this meeting." "Gordon," he assured her, "we will. And again, I apologize. We failed to uphold the values you and your father instilled. I will personally see to it that we rectify this." Naomi ended the call with a sense of guarded optimism. Gordon was generally a solid leader, but she'd also encountered corporate leaders who promised change, yet delivered watered-down solutions. This time, Naomi wouldn't accept half measures. The future of Skyward Jet's reputation and her own conscience depended on decisive action. By the time Naomi arrived at her Los Angeles hotel, the Hilton Los Angeles Airport, she was physically drained, yet mentally keyed up. Clara had arranged a suite on a high floor, offering sweeping views of the city lights. However, Naomi barely noticed the amenities as she paced the living area, speaking on the phone with various board members. Some had already heard rumors of what had transpired. Others were shocked to learn that Naomi had been on the flight incognito. Each call ended with the same vow to address the issue and support Naomi's proposals. Yet she knew that corporate promises often needed a firm push. Late into the evening, Naomi sat at the desk, writing a detailed statement to present at the next day's board meeting. She was determined to set the tone for a major overhaul in Skyward Jet's HR policies. In addition, she formulated a special initiative, a scholarship fund for airline employees seeking professional development in areas of cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution. She believed some employees might just need better training or a second chance to correct learned biases, though she also knew some might be beyond redemption. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Naomi allowed herself a moment of introspection. She had arrived in Los Angeles primarily to finalize philanthropic partnerships, yet her mission had expanded. She sensed her father's presence guiding her. If David Carter were alive, he'd stand firmly beside her, championing respect for all. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Skyward Jet's headquarters, dressed in a sharp charcoal pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. Gordon Fraser greeted her at the entrance with a tight smile. "Thanks for coming so quickly," he said, extending his hand. Naomi shook it firmly. "Let's make this count." In the glass-walled conference room, the board members rose as Naomi entered among them. CFO, James Hopkins, COO, Elena Rodriguez, and HR Director, Sylvia Lynn. The air was thick with anticipation. Gordon began, "We're here to address a serious incident. Naomi, the floor is yours." She stood calmly. "As many of you know, I was on Skyward Jet Flight 207. I personally witnessed discriminatory behavior from senior flight attendant Regina Parker. I've submitted a statement and compiled passenger testimonies." Sylvia reviewed the papers. "She's had previous complaints, mild reprimands, nothing serious. That ends today," Naomi said. "We either take action or send the message that this conduct is acceptable. I recommend immediate suspension and a broader overhaul of our training and oversight systems." James added, "We can't afford reputational damage." Elena agreed. "This affects the brand." After brief discussion, Gordon concluded Regina will be placed on leave pending investigation. "We'll also implement Naomi's training reforms and improve reporting systems." Naomi nodded. "That's a good start. But let's be clear, this isn't just about one employee. It's about setting a precedent." As she sat down, the room was silent. But Naomi knew change had begun. Within hours, word of Regina Parker's indefinite suspension rippled through the company. Naomi left the boardroom with a sense of cautious triumph. She knew implementing real change would take time, but this was a decisive blow to the toxic behavior that Regina embodied. An email from Sylvia Lynn confirmed that Regina had been notified of the suspension. If found guilty of violating the airline's anti-discrimination policies, she would be terminated. Naomi glimpsed the relief in the eyes of employees she passed in the hallway, many of whom likely had encountered Regina's hostility or heard stories about it. Meanwhile, the passenger from seat 13B, the one who'd requested the vegetarian meal, received a personal apology from the airline, along with a voucher for future flights. Other passengers who'd witnessed the altercation were also thanked for their cooperation in the investigation. Naomi insisted the airline handle it thoroughly, ensuring each affected individual felt heard. In the weeks following the turbulent flight, Naomi Carter watched as Skyward Jet underwent a transformation that rippled from the cabin crew to the executive boardroom. Regina Parker, whose discriminatory behavior had gone unchecked for too long, was swiftly placed on suspension and after a thorough investigation officially terminated. Though Regina pleaded for leniency, the board, armed with passenger testimonies and Naomi's own first-hand account, concluded that accountability was non-negotiable. For Naomi, this wasn't about revenge. It was about setting a new standard. She spearheaded a complete overhaul of Skyward Jet's HR and training protocols, instituting mandatory diversity workshops, cultural empathy courses, and stronger whistleblower protections. Employees initially met the reforms with hesitation, but as understanding grew, so did the airline's morale and customer satisfaction. Passengers noticed the difference, and so did the media. Skyward Jet began to be hailed as a model for modern corporate responsibility. One voice that stood out amid the change was Helena's. The flight attendant who had quietly aided Naomi and comforted a mistreated passenger wrote a heartfelt email expressing both guilt and gratitude. Naomi assured her she had done the right thing and used Helena's note as a catalyst for better internal reporting systems. It reminded Naomi that small acts of courage like Helena's were the seeds of institutional change. A year later, Naomi was back on a Skyward Jet flight, flying incognito as always. She observed a crew member helping a passenger with a thick accent by speaking a few words in their language. Something unthinkable during Regina's reign. It made Naomi smile. The seeds of compassion she'd planted were blooming. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived. From Regina. The once haughty flight attendant confessed her deep remorse. After losing her job, she had faced homelessness, divorce, and shame, but also rebirth. She enrolled in diversity training at a local college and began volunteering with immigrant support groups. Her words were filled with sincerity, especially her final lines. "Thank you for forcing me to see myself clearly. I hated you for it at first. Now I see it saved me." Naomi didn't reply immediately, but she was moved. She'd always believed in redemption, even when justice came first. Regina's journey proved that karma wasn't just about punishment. It could also be a doorway to growth. In time, Naomi's quiet act of presenting the airline deed became legend within Skyward Jet. It was retold during training sessions as a story of hidden power, humility, and the danger of judging by appearances. New hires asked, "Did that really happen?" And they were awed when told it did. Years passed. Skyward Jet held annual Global Unity Days, celebrated diverse languages in their in-flight announcements, and trained every staff member right down to janitorial services in cultural sensitivity. Naomi continued flying economy, blending in to keep her eyes on the true heartbeat of her airline. On one such flight, a kind attendant offered her tea and a warm greeting without knowing who she was. Naomi received no special treatment, and that to her was the greatest sign of progress. Sometimes she would pause before the portrait of her father in the Carter Global Holdings lobby. David Carter had built an empire from Lagos to the skies, and Naomi had continued his legacy by embedding dignity into every mile flown. She could almost hear his voice. "Never let them shame your voice. Let it ring with truth. And she had. From one turbulent flight came not just the fall of a prejudiced employee, but the rise of a better airline one where accents are honored, kindness is policy, and dignity is non-negotiable. Skyward Jet didn't just soar through the skies. Now it soared with purpose. Thank you for listening to this unfolding drama of power, prejudice, and redemption. Naomi Carter's story reminds us that you never know who you might be speaking to or mocking when you judge someone based on appearances or accents. Her quiet resilience and unwavering principle of respect transformed not only Regina Parker's life, but the entire culture of an airline. Sometimes it takes just one courageous act to ignite a wave of change, turning a tale of cruelty into a victory for compassion and decency. If this story moved you, taught you something, or simply kept you on the edge of your seat, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends who love a great twist, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that inspire and enlighten. Together, let's spread kindness and empathy across every corner of our world. Safe travels, everyone.